Whole Foods is literally Walmart. What do you? I just spent my evening in Angela. So Italian. Bought me for like 5 minutes on the rock table.
What's that?
Cooking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks for my text. What? Problem. Oh my God. No.
Just a random person stopped.
Yeah, they all ask you to take a picture. They don't have to name now. No, I said I don't know. I know.
Black Friday. Dude, like 50 to 60. I think I paid like $15. Where are you doing?
And then Kay has this on too?
I've never been to
Because it's just your urban and live.
I think I spent $200 to sweaty.
No, it's okay. It's they are. Kay will go.
What you're saying? The difference is black and the
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah, but not all the people on the campus continue to know what they're doing.
That's a personal thing. That's not a
Sweatshirt, tennis shoes, Crocs, they're not business professional. I don't care what.
It's business casual.
No, it's business what they call it. Business professional. They can't be. I think it's direct entry.
Yeah. I mean, but, okay, that's like,
I'll just talk.
We don't have a problem.
yeah, there's
And-
people that should not.
Yeah, well, that's everywhere. I think that's.
Yeah. The symptoms are the exact same. They actually don't know the exact
Okay, who are we missing?
Are they?
Group leader.
John is gonna be a little late.
But you know John is coming.
Yes, I know for a fact.
All right.
We know most of them. Or less.
John Snyder. And everyone else is here. Here's a question for you. This surprises me. It looks here on the schedule, my schedule, master schedule for this, it says Thursday is your last class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That quick? Damn.
So it was an 11-day block instead of a 12-day block for some reason.
Yeah.
Did we not get an extra day because of this one?
Thanksgiving. Yeah.
But we didn't have a makeup, right?
Right. We
We did not have a makeup.
Like, we don't have any makeups for fish class.
Yeah.
Like, our fish class was short.
Okay, so that occasionally happens, I just was not on top of it, but here's the deal now. This is significant. When we get together next class, it is your final exam. There will be no lecture. And it will be true today's lecture on waste. Jewel. What I'll do is hand out a 40-question multiple choice test. You'll take it here in class on a Scantron. You must bring a pencil, and off you will go.
Yep.
I was planning on having another unit on biodiversity. So, I'm glad I picked up on that. So everybody's all square with that. So Thursday when you come in, last class, it is a final exam. I would recommend read the introduction documents, look at your notes, Try to remember those things we talked about in class. And you should do very well.
It's gonna be like the same stuff that was on the quizzes?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I'm certain you're busy, but the biodiversity unit would not hurt probably to read that introduction as well. Not so much for the final, but just for your general understanding. It's a huge topic. We've touched on it a little bit, but not in detail because I was going to do a unit on it. But today's waste. Here's one you can all get your arms around. You've experienced it firsthand in your home life and your opportunities where you worked in industry, and of course you've seen it firsthand here at the school as you've walked through your classes. It is a huge problem, and it is, at least in developed countries, it is increasingly more of a problem as we go through time. I am hopeful we are at a key point here where we're now starting to pay attention, and there's a lot of reasons to pay attention. From my perspective, the impact in terms of our natural resources waste is very significant, and we'll see some figures later. On a dollar basis, it's significant. And then, of course, the thing that everyone will relate to very quickly when you see some of these numbers is, how can we allow this waste to occur when we have a large number of people, not just in this country, but across the globe, who are food insecure? Very quickly, it looks like waste might be the answer to solving lots of our problems if we can just get our arms around it. I think the first thing is for people really to understand the magnitude, and that's what we're going to do today. As an introduction to the topic, and just to reinforce that there are a lot of chefs paying great attention to waste now, there is a new documentary movie, Waste. Did anybody see the whole movie yet?
I haven't, but I've seen it.
Yeah. And this is just a trailer with some of the chefs that certainly you're familiar with, where they talk about waste and the attention that it's getting today.
Can you watch it online? The whole movie?
You cannot.
Has that been found?
We are trying to get it here at the school. We are trying to buy a license. I don't know when that'll happen, but no, we cannot at this time.
I started watching a TED Talk that they did, or like not a TED Talk, but there was like an hour-long talk that they
Serious. I don't even know that we deserve to live. But as a young cook, I came up in an old school system, use everything, waste nothing.
I've actually never thought about what happens to my food when I throw it away. In the United States, 40% of the food we produce is going to waste.
Food production is the single biggest cause of deforestation, water extraction, biodiversity loss.
More and more people are concerned about climate change, and one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases is the food that they're throwing away.
We are literally taking food out of the mouths of the hungry and sending food waste into landfill. That is crazy.
We don't need to produce more. We need to act different.
What does a chef do? They take something that's ugly and tough and transform it into something wonderful.
We celebrate utilization of nose to tail for an animal, but rarely for a farm.
None of this typically gets consumed, and that's delicious.
Wow, that's what I love about waste. You have to look at your kitchen in a different light. I think we got it.
Flavor's amazing, right? People think it's a garbage fish. I put it on the menu as a rata americana. So you make the penne.
Fishermen's wives took this reject fish and they created bouillabaisse. Prosciutto di Parma, that is a waste-fed pig. They're not sold as waste, they're sold as delicious dishes.
We have the power to demand change from the food industry, and unless we shout about it, they'll never change.
We need to harness people's obsession with food right now. We're learning from that resourcefulness. Wow, oh my God. This is like the best thing I've ever had, ever.
It really does come down to what are our values as society.
You're gonna help me cook when we get home? Outside now.
Tackling food waste doesn't need to be depressing, it's delicious.
It doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You can reduce the amount of food waste.
That's exciting. This is something important. We can do it.
perception of doing the right thing. How often do you get to do that?
So some big name chefs. Again, very recent. The movie came out in the last 6 months. And it is a real challenge for our industry. As I walk through the PowerPoint today, you're going to get a good sense of the magnitude. And in parts of the PowerPoint, I talk about some new approaches that have been very successful in reducing waste. Any questions or any comments on that video? And again, as we go through this, I want you to think about your personal experiences, again, whether it be in your home, whether it be when you worked in industry, or whether you see here at the school. And we'll just talk about some relatively straightforward approaches to making a big difference. This is from National Geographic. This is a family of 4. That's representative of a yearly food waste. I've seen numbers anywhere from $1,500 in loss to $2,500, and basically from 200 to 300 pounds per person of food waste a year. That's the U.S. per capita loss. Pretty dramatic when you look at it like that. And it's fairly accurate if you look at the life cycle analysis and look at some of the underlying statistics in terms of whether it's grains, vegetables, meats, fish, where the loss occurs. This is fairly representative. I mean, that's basically a whole pig laying there, a salmon, amazing amount of dairy, and of course, lots of vegetables and fruits. Here's some data, and again, some significant variability. However, the number right up front that you need to get your arms around is a U.S. number, although it's very similar in most developed countries. 40% of the food produced never gets consumed. 40%. In the U.S. alone, the number here is a loss of $160 billion. Worldwide, it's over $1 trillion. It's huge. So again, 30 to 40% of all food produced, never consumed. Loss occurs across every stage of the food system. So from production through consumption. It turns out a great amount of loss occurs at the last stage. I have a big range here, I'll admit 20 to 60%. Occurs in the home or restaurant. But this is what's really concerning, that last bullet. U.S. per capita food waste has increased 50% since the 1970s. So basically, when your parents were your age or in high school, they were 50% more thrifty with respect to food waste. Let's think about that. How can that be? What are some precipitators that have caused that? Any guesses? Think about that. That's one generation, 50% worse. Go ahead.
Post-war booms,
Post-war,
like baby boom, along with bigger corporations, like bigger businesses and oversight.
I think you're kind of on the right track, but I don't think that, I think I'd expand a little more on it. How does that directly result in food waste?
They're not as careful as they were during the Great Depression.
The Great Depression, you said?
Yeah.
Well, certainly, and that's back even further, well before the 70s. But yeah, there were many people in the 70s had lived through the Great Depression. And in the Great Depression, things were really tight. Food was precious. You kind of never get over that. And I'm guessing maybe some of you, personally, in your life, there were periods, potentially, where you didn't have easy access to food. And you hold it in high regard. That's a big piece of it. Any other guesses? Yeah.
Technology is advanced enough to make it cheap or easier
in terms of what people live through, and we can use the word cheap. I told you earlier in the class that in the U.S. today, most developed countries, we pay the very least of disposable income for our food than we ever have. And I think just psychologically, if something is cheap, we don't hold it in high regard. If it's cheap, it must not have value. So as a consequence, we don't necessarily appreciate that food like we should. We don't have that connection to the production, or that connection to the growers. It's just something that we don't really think about. And for this group of people, that shouldn't be the case. I mean, you understand in your future, your opportunity, at least for now, is tied to the fact that people do have a relationship with food. Yeah, I think essentially those are the precipitators, and that is not a good trend. Now the question is, have we capped off, and are we going to reverse the trend? I think so. But one of the things we need to do is make this data set, the fact that we have 40% of our food never consumed, we have to make it generally understood. Because it's obscene, isn't it? I mean, you hear that 40%? Does that seem okay? It really isn't. And as we saw in that little trailer, that a lot of chefs agree. Anthony Bourdain felt very strongly. These are some facts from a group called Food Tag. I guess we can walk through them. I mean, hopefully you have a chance to read the introduction document and do the readings, and you would have seen some of these. But it's 1.3 billion tons of food wasted globally a year. Over $1 trillion is lost in terms of the economy from that wasted food. In terms of how we dispose our wasted food, that's the bullet 3. Because in general, most food waste isn't handled properly. It's landfilled. And we'll talk a lot about the mechanism of landfilling in terms of how it breaks down, but essentially it gives off methane gas. So wasted food as a country would be the 3rd largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. Technically, I should say producer of carbon in the world. 1/4 of all wasted food could feed basically 800 million people, and that's the rough number that the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization uses to represent those people on the planet that are food insecure for extended periods of time. And just an example of food waste in a rich country, the waste in Europe and the U.S. is equivalent to all the food produced in a large part of Africa, the sub-Saharan Africa. It makes sense?
Wait, were you saying that?
Our waste is equivalent to all the food they consume. So, I mean, it just gives you an idea of the scale.
People have to utilize every part of it.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. It turns out there is significant waste in sub-Saharan Africa and developing nations, but you're very astute. It does not occur in the home. And remember, the U.S., 20 to 60% occurs in that final stage. In those countries, if it gets to them, they're going to eat it.
Right, yeah.
The problem is they don't have the infrastructure early on in the early parts of the supply chain where there is significant loss. So basically, I gave you this number, 100 kilograms. We waste 15 times at the consumption level what a typical African consumer would. The bullet 3 says it is the lack of technology and infrastructure, main cause of food waste in Africa, as opposed to the loss at the stage of consumption. Europe alone could feed 200 million hungry people. And here's a statistic in terms of 3.3 billion tons of carbon dioxide. When we looked at soil, remember the visual I gave you what a ton of carbon dioxide looks like? What did it look like? Who remembers? Yeah, it looked like a basic standard 2,000 square foot house. That's a ton. So basically, we're putting 3.3 billion of those houses of carbon into our atmosphere. And there is no question, although our atmosphere is of immense scale, that it is starting to make a difference. Graphically, this just kind of highlights the statement that if food waste was a country, it'd be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gas. There we have China, Today, China is almost a 2x emitter over the U.S., but food waste is great. The climate change associated with food waste is greater than all the other emissions in India. So it's a big deal. This chart isn't necessarily direct to food waste, but it is direct to greenhouse gas emissions. And just a reminder how, as the world changes, some countries become economically stronger, globally, some of the issues we're going to have to deal with. I mean, you can look at the U.S. from about 1985 to 2010, and there's just very modest growth in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions, and in fact, some tailing after 2007. That tailing hasn't really continued, but we are below the peak today, even at 2017. So we have kind of stabilized as a nation. And food waste, again, maybe 20% of that. But if you look what's happened with China in particular, you can see in the year 1996, the U.S. was about a 2x emitter over China. And today, in a relatively short time, 20 years, China is a 2x emitter over the U.S. So while we need to address it, certainly country by country, it is a global issue. This is a U.S. statistic, and it says food waste, basically, is the largest component by waste in municipal solid landfill, as municipal solid waste. And the issue is, when it's landfilled, because of odors, because of sanitation, they cover it relatively quickly. When you cover any organic material, you basically will no longer allow it to have access to oxygen. It's biodegradable, it's going to break down, but it's going to have to break down by bacteria, natural bacteria. And as a consequence, it gives off methane, CH4, rather than CO2. If it broke down in the presence of oxygen, it would give off CO2. What's the mechanism for managing food waste oxidatively? We talked about it in an earlier class when we did soils. That would be?
Aerobic respiration?
Say it?
Aerobic respiration?
It would be aerobic respiration. But what do we typically call that process?
Photosynthesis?
No. For breaking down food waste. You, in fact, talked about it at your home, I believe. Composting. Composting. So composting would be significantly better, but if you recall from soils, as little as 3%, 5% of all food waste in the U.S. gets composted. And methane is much more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2.
What is MSW stand for again?
What's that?
What is MSW stand for again?
Municipal solid waste. So it's basically when the truck comes to your house and takes it away. By weight, food waste is the #1 component today in the U.S. And that's a relatively new occurrence too. Here's what's happened. We've already talked about that our food waste has gone up 50% since the 1970s. So just that alone makes it a more significant component of our waste stream. But what's really happened to kind of tip the scale is this. We have been focused on recycling for a number of years for building materials, glass, metals, cans. So as we recycle those things better, we remove that component from the waste stream. But we aren't doing anything with food waste. So as a consequence, food waste is really creeping up. It is, again, it's the largest component. And when you think about the food waste, remember, we eat food and we eat this for our nutrient. Where did the nutrient come from? It came from the oceans and the soils. But we're never getting a chance to return it to those places. We're just basically localizing it. We're capping it, and it's breaking down very slowly and anaerobically. So some externalities associated with waste. Basically, waste is responsible for about 80% of global deforestation. In other words, if we didn't have 40% waste, we wouldn't have to go and acquire these new lands. We could leave the existing ecosystems in place. It creates about 30% of greenhouse gases, and it is a key factor in biodiversity loss, Essentially what that means is we take these new lands, we're changing the ecosystem, they're no longer a natural system with lots of different species. They are now a managed system. Here's the waste per capita, kilograms per year. In North America, it's showing almost 300 kilograms. Very different than the other statistic we saw, which was just over 100. And what is most stark here, if you look at the distribution between the consumer and the supply chain production through retailing, is in developed countries, the consumers waste it. And we've already talked about it, but you look at some of the sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, Latin America, all the loss occurs in the early stages, not at the consumption level. And when I think about it from the perspective of a U.S. citizen or a citizen from a developed country, it really, what stands out is, since it's occurring in the home, it's occurring in the restaurant, we do have control over it. We directly have control over it. It's our practices that basically facilitate this loss. This chart expands a little on the last one. Instead of just having consumption and then having production through retailing, it breaks production through retailing out. So now we have production, handling and storage, processing, distribution, and marketing. And again, in North America, roughly half of the waste occurs at the consumption level. We are very efficient. We have best practices in the other stages there. I mean, production, just a little loss. Handling and storage, we have good refrigeration. We have good transportation. Processing, very efficient. We use most of the product. And distribution and marketing, again, very efficient. And of course, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, our 60% translates to a 5% loss in consumption. In other words, if they get it in their home, it's precious. They're going to consume it. But they don't have the good production methods. They don't have good transportation. They don't have proper storage, so they lose a lot of it in earlier cycles. Any comments on that? Pretty straightforward. I mean, this is an easy topic. It's fact-based. The readings I gave you, I think, were really strong, especially the last paper from the National Resource Defense Council. If you read that, it's 21 pages. I know we're finishing up pretty quickly, but there's, I don't know if you download those things to a private disk or something, but that's a good document, or at least know how to get access to it. I really believe in the future, not just chefs, but people that are being recruited for opportunities in business, if they show a real interest in waste and a good knowledge, you'll make yourself a better candidate. Because the waste directly translates to dollars and cents. And anybody that owns a business would be interested in having a chef in there that's going to be efficient with their food costs. I want to walk you through this. Had anyone seen this prior to this? Let's see, this is 2.5 years old. Oh, not quite 2.5 years old. It's over 2 years old. This is from the U.S. government, the Environmental Protection Agency, primarily through the recognition that we have a global warming issue with greenhouse gas. They decided to do some general recommendations. And this is actually, this food recovery hierarchy is kind of like the My Plate from the USDA in terms of a recommendation that they would like all citizens to be aware of. Obviously, the fact that none of you have ever seen this says they didn't do too good a job making it understood or publicly available. It's, it's out on their website, certainly, and if you've read a number of articles when it came out, it was published there. But it basically says this is how we have to manage waste. This is how we're going to fix the issue of 40% food waste in the U.S. We're going to be more responsible, and we're going to follow this approach. So right at the very top, real simple. If we know we're going to waste it, why are we even producing it? So don't produce an extra 40%. Source reduction. That'd be the best thing we could do. The next thing says, well, look, we produced it, but let's not waste it. We know, and in the U.S., 1 in 6 people are on some level of food support. Let's take that waste and solve that problem of food insecurity. If we can't feed people, look, we're still eating a lot of animal protein. That waste, it's got to be good enough for some of these animals. Why don't we feed the animals, offset our cost of feeding the animals, offset the amount of corn and other grain products we have to grow? This is where we can talk about, because historically, and it's still in parts of the world, this was how waste was managed forever. I mean, the pig is the perfect animal. In rural areas, pig was a garbage disposal. If you had waste in the house, what did you do with it? You fed it to the pig. And then come fall, you'd eat the pig. Kind of a nice cycle. Keep things within, again, that localized area. So source reduction, feed hungry people, next feed animals. This next piece is interesting. It says industrial uses. What do I mean by that, or what do they mean by that? Basically, it says, instead of really looking at it as waste, let's find some utility for it, something that has value. They often refer to that as a co-product. So what can I do with it? Now, I'm going to show you in a minute some really interesting opportunities associated with food waste. But in general, one of the big areas today, and there's an announcement in the news last week from Vermont, from Middlebury College, is one of the things we can do with food waste is we can bring it all together in a special facility. We can allow it to break down with bacteria anaerobically, absence of oxygen, but we can capture that methane gas. That's natural gas. We can use that as an energy source. Worldwide, there are a number of facilities. They're costly. The U.S., there are some. There are people looking at doing it on a larger scale, and what happened in Vermont just last week, an agreement with a large dairy farm in Middlebury College. Middlebury agreed to use all the methane gas that they could produce, and it would be enough to provide all their energy needs at that college. So they would essentially have a zero carbon footprint, all local. But other industrial uses are, you can make dyes for coloring clothes. You can, kind of the sky's the limit in terms of what you can do. Next, it says composting. It might surprise you, composting is fairly low on the scale. I think it's low on the scale for two reasons. One is composting is oxidative. While you do sequester, capture significant carbon in the remaining material, you do give off a lot of CO2. But the other problem is, what do we do with the compost? We don't have mechanisms to get it back onto our agricultural lands, because essentially what we want to do, we've removed the nutrient, we'd like to return the nutrient back to that soil-to-soil type of structure. So we've got a ways to go there. But as I've already stated, 3 to 5% of food waste is composted in the U.S., so a very small amount. And then, of course, the very worst thing we can do is landfill it. And I've already told you that's the number one thing we are doing with it. So we're kind of broken. And again, there's going to be a lot of innovation. There's going to be a lot of attention across all these elements. For young people, if any of you are really business-minded, creative, I think this is a huge opportunity area. It's waste. It's food waste. You don't have to pay for it as a natural resource. They'll give it to you. Now you've got to think of something to do. Go ahead.
I don't know if someone in this class brought it up, but have you seen the articles about the trash and being bacteria?
Well, basically, anaerobic digestion is broken down by
But
trash.
like plastic, non-biodegradable.
Yes. Yeah, they've done a lot with bacteria, trying to, and first with the one that was they capture bacteria that has special properties, they grow them out, and then they inoculate plastic or actually fuel oil spills with these bacteria, and they break it down to the base elements. So that is an area of opportunity, certainly.
Is there any other ways that they have to like clear out like landfills and stuff that's burning it?
Well, really what to do with most of the landfills today, I mean, there are some that combust. Like the city of or the Dutchess County had a waste recovery program where they were burning garbage to create energy. You know, things will burn, and if it burns, you create heat, you can turn the turbine, you can create energy. The problem with food waste is it's mostly water, so it takes so much energy to get it to combust, it really doesn't buy anything. But yeah, I mean, this is the area of great opportunity with technology, new thoughts, new processes, new facilities. You know, I think there will be some breakthroughs. Yeah.
So the second one on there is feeding like hungry people, so donating food to like food banks and stuff. And like just I know like I've tried to like do this at like my old school and stuff, but the number of like regulations that you have to like try and like jump through almost to like be able to donate is like ridiculous, and you have to like label them a certain way, and like but there's a lot of like if you make people sick, you're still reliable and stuff, or not reliable, but
Liable?
Liable, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like I guess I just like that's like really hard, and that's why like a lot of restaurants don't do it, because you're still liable for any sicknesses.
Okay.
So.
First of all, the regulations are self-imposed. There are no regulations in terms of food donations. They're either imposed by the person who wants to do donation, or in some instances, they might be imposed by the agency that will collect the food. In other words, things that have to be refrigerated, they don't have refrigeration, so they can't accept them. In fact, from a liability view, the U.S. Congress passed a law in '94. There is no liability. If you donate food and someone gets sick, you are not liable. There's never been a court case yet. Unless you knowingly donated something that you knew would get someone sick.
So why can't the school donate extra food?
Now we're getting, remember I said the problem is either with the person who wants to donate or the person who receives? So let's talk about our school. And by the way, we did do some significant donations right before Thanksgiving for those things that wouldn't make it across the 5 days. But a lot of businesses, and you can probably understand this from the perspective of the CAA, they have an image, they have a brand. We have a very strong food brand. Realistically, there is food-borne illness, very common, right? Well, 4,000 people die in the U.S. of food poisoning a year, and about 9 million people get food poisoning in the U.S. a year. So it happens, right? Inadvertently, sometimes just bad procedures. The school, think about it, if we donated, and I'm not saying this is a good excuse, but if we did donate something on a regular basis and someone did get sick, and they could figure it out that we donate something that probably had a health risk associated with it, that would be really disruptive to our brand. I mean, if anyone should be able to donate food and not get somebody sick, it ought to be us, right? So even though it's a small chance, it could happen, it happens, right? And I think we're not willing to take that hit. And you're part of that too, because one of your opportunities in life is going to be based on the fact that you graduated from the school and has a very strong brand. So in other words, that brand you want to protect as well. And one more time, I would like to see us donate when we're actually working on it. We're doing some much better things, but we've got a ways to go. Go ahead.
I mean, like, if you use that logic, it doesn't really work. Like, I'm not saying, like, I know you said, like, you know, you don't support that or whatever, but, like, there's, like, big companies, no matter what, that, like, have a reputation and stuff. And so I think, like, if we're trying to, like, set trends and stuff, we shouldn't be, like, concerned
That's the other side of the coin. That could build our reputation, right? If we publicize that we were leading organization in terms of making food available to the local communities. You're absolutely right. So there's two sides of the coin.
Yeah, it's like we're being selfish and like scared that like we could have our reputation hurt more than like helping people.
Yeah. By the way, the congressional law that allows for the donations called the Emerson Act, if you want to read about it, Emerson Act. You've all carried the blue buckets out, and I'm sure you peeked in them. Have any of you ever grabbed something out and eaten it? But have you looked at it and thought about maybe?
No.
No. But have you seen things that you said if people were hungry, it would be really nice to give this to them rather than take it out to the.
I'm taking things out of the blue bucket
I have to-
before they gone out.
Yeah.
Whole clothes.
Because I'm not right. I'm not talking about the dumpster out there. I'm talking about the blue bucket at the end of the day.
People throw away a lot of shit.
They do.
I take plastic out of it.
Yeah.
Well, obviously you want, yeah, because that's really important. That's one of the issues we have. We have a system. We have trash, we have recycling, and we have compostables. And if you contaminate the compostable, it makes it really difficult in our composting process for the people that use it. You know, I've gone to the facility and I've looked and I've read through. And one thing I find all the time is the gloves wind up in there. And in the composting process, that heat, those gloves turn into almost like little super bowls. They're not quite round and they don't really bounce, but they're something that shouldn't have been there. They got to be removed manually. So you do want to be really careful with that waste. Any other comments on this? Have you ever worked in a restaurant where they had a great focus on waste? Same thing, so you work in restaurants, you see essentially the same thing. I mean, clearly, here's something interesting that I've been kind of involved in. I'm interested in anaerobic digestion. That's how I know about what's going on at Middlebury College and an announcement last week. And there's another component to it called digestate. When you get all done with making the gas, there's leftovers. There's residual material. That residual material has basically all the nutrients with the exception of some of the carbon, because CH4 doesn't have nitrogen, doesn't have phosphorus, doesn't have potassium, doesn't have calcium, doesn't have any of those. So you're left with whatever was in the plant, and that can be used as fertilizer. So it's kind of interesting. But Vermont, and this makes no sense at all, in terms of regulation at the state level, they have a requirement. They won't allow waste from restaurants that came back from a table to be used in this process. So in other words, in the kitchen, under good sanitation and best practices, I can put that in a blue bin and I can take that to an anaerobic digester if there's one in my community. But the table scraps that come back from the table, I cannot.
Wow.
There is no reason at all.
No?
But with the exception that it's possible somebody was very sick in the restaurant. They could have.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can.
But the mechanics of the science of the anaerobic digestion makes that, again, remember, right to the base elements, it's no longer an issue.
But even if we turn this into compost, wouldn't that matter where it came from?
Well, again, that's not compost, but it would be the same thing would apply. They wouldn't let you put that in their organic compost either.
Not true.
So, I mean, so that is a regulation issue at a state level. So I think that's got to be, and maybe with this new initiative in Middlebury, they'll have to address it, because they're going to take all the food waste from the school, which they're composting right now at their school garden, and they're going to bring it to the anaerobic digester. Let's think about this for a while. This is the problem. And there's a lot of good articles. Harvard did a study a couple years ago. If you want to read about this on the internet. This is part of the issue. And it may not be a big part, but at the consumer level, it's at least 10% of waste. Maybe as high as 25%. Certainly, you're all familiar with sell-by, best-by, use-by dates. How many people here look at them religiously when they grab some out of the refrigerator? No. Yeah, they're there. There must be a reason, right? And if something has significantly exceeded it, are you going to eat it? Maybe you like that. You're going to do what?
Yogurt. Yeah, if it smells like it doesn't smell rancid, I usually give it to Jens. Like if it's not been opened.
Even if it hasn't been opened, I give it a chance. Go ahead.
Okay, so for Thanksgiving,
There you go.
I went home,
Yep.
and so there's like some things like in the fridge that were like still there because like my parents don't use them, and they were things that like I
Yes.
was using. and I went to like open some of them, and they like not only was the date bad, but they just smelled awful, and so like I had to get rid of it. But there were like a few things that like cocktail sauce and stuff that it was like way past the date, but it was still fine.
Because you use
There's
judgment.
a lot of like, yeah.
A lot of people don't use judgment. I mean, they don't even open the top, they look at the date. If it's exceeded the date, they discard it. You have a good skill set as food professionals. Yeah, you can use your nose, you can taste. In general, the dates are relatively meaningless. But the average person doesn't understand that and doesn't take the time. Yeah, I mean, cheese is a good example. You know, I'm sure, like you said, you know, you go away for 3 months, you come home, you're digging around the refrigerator, you need a snack, and you find a piece of cheese that fell out of the drawer and it's got a little mold on it. You know, if the mold is on the outside, the cheese is fine.
Mom will cut it off. She won't go to it, she'll cut it off.
There you go. It is. Now, there are some molds. If you ever see pink or yellow molds or black hairy molds, you should be wary. Or if when you cut through the cheese, the mold is penetrated deeply. But if it's just on the exterior, it's just not a problem. And so many people will.
I work in the store and we cut off the mold on the outside of the cheese.
Yeah, I mean, it just picked up a bacteria, picked up a mold, something in the local environment, and of course with the moisture and the nutrient, that's basically how we make cheeses anyway. You're actually creating a new cheese. But so this is a huge issue. A story I tell classes sometimes is, I bought a house a couple years ago up in the mountains on a lake, and I bought it as is, fully furnished, with a pantry, lots of food. I've been eating out of that pantry now for 5 or 6 years. Everything in it is 4 or 5 years past date. Sealed in jars or cans. And there are some quality issues. I went up last winter for a ski trip, and I brought a pork roast, and there's no supermarket within 40 miles, so you're kind of stuck. And I was saying, boy, it'd be really nice to have red cabbage, you know, with this pork roast. And I look around, and sure enough, there's a jar of red cabbage. And I look at it, it was like 7 years expired, but it was sealed. So I popped the lid and poured it into the pot, and it poured out like applesauce. I mean, there was absolutely no texture at all. I ate it. No one else did. It wasn't very good texturally, but it tasted like maybe, and it certainly was red cabbage at some point. At some point. So basically, this is a real issue. And maybe, again, with the exception of drugs and infant formula. But now what I want you to do, and some of you I think will pick up on this quick, what do you think's going on with this? Why is it the manufacturer's interest? What are they looking to do? Yeah.
Well, they want you to continue buying stuff, so.
Exactly. Yeah, they need, like any business, you need to have kind of a dependable forecast in terms of your sales, how many units you're going to sell. And by putting the dates and knowing that people are either going to consume them or discard them, you have basically more reliability in terms of that forecasting. There actually is a concept, and not so much food, but I think it's interesting, people are just starting to come to this, with manufactured items. It's called planned obsolescence. Has anyone ever looked into planned? It's kind of interesting, isn't it? I tend to think they're doing the same thing with our foods, and that is a real disservice. Where'd you look at planned obsolescence?
Well, we learned that in American history. They started
Here at the school, or?
No, in high school.
High school?
But that I immediately thought of that when Ashley mentioned that it was for marketing, so they can buy. When I first learned it, it was about we were learning about 50s home American culture, and how they started inventing appliances to only be good for a certain amount of time, or they would either use marketing to make it seem oh, your oven or your washer, whatever, is obsolete. The next best thing is here, you should get it or you're behind. So there's this,
Yeah, I mean, there is an economic basis for it. Think about it. If you were a manufacturer and you made the very best of something, and if once somebody bought it, they would never have to buy another one, eventually you go out of business, right? we see that. I mean, there's a lot of controversy with Apple today in terms of their cell phones, in terms of how incompatible across time and things, because they don't want you holding on to that 5S forever. They want you 2 years down the line to buy a 7 or 10 or whatever they're up to now. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So anyway, the sell by, best by, use by dates, there is a lot of controversy. There is no governmental regulation on them. These are entirely decided by manufacturers, and they are extremely confusing. Now, things do go bad, but you have to use your judgment. For example, produce goes bad faster than anything, but there's no sell-by dates on a head of broccoli, right? You don't just say, well, you know, it's been in my refrigerator since last summer. There's nothing on it. Might as well, it looks horrible, but I guess I could eat it. I mean, typically you wouldn't want to do that. You would have lost all this nutrient. Is there a comment over here? So this is something just to be really aware of. But it's the same type of thing in the food service industry. I don't know if I would be as comfortable as in the home in terms of making a judgment. If I had a can of, there's a can of pudding back there. It says do not use, about 5 years old. I love pudding. I was thinking opening up some day after class. I mean, I wouldn't serve that to other people in food service. Somebody else likes pudding. Somebody's going to get it before I get it. See, it's a big number 10 can of vanilla pudding. That's a real treat.
Cisco can.
Yeah.
Wait,
Chocolate or vanilla?
It's vanilla.
All right, one more time. We'll just kind of just talk through the landfilling again. So MSW stands for Municipal Solid Waste. And again, you should remember that food waste is the largest component by weight. And landfills, because we cover it, breaks down the absence of oxygen. That's what anaerobically means. And it releases its carbon as methane, so natural gas. And natural gas, or methane, is a very potent greenhouse gas, much worse than carbon dioxide. Okay, here's some opportunities. So if we go back to this layer, the industrial use. Here's some relatively new startups. So recognizing that 1 of 5 fruits or vegetables don't meet grading standards or retailers' cosmetic standards, they were basically landfilled. Today, there are companies like Imperfect Produce. They'll buy it, or they'll be given it, and they'll remarket it very cheap, but it's much better, 30 to 50% off, than landfilling it. Root to leaf. Maybe you never thought about this. In the video we just saw, Dan Barber, I think he was eating a cauliflower leaf and saying, this is really good. Well, Dan, it isn't really good, and he knows it's not really good. But it's edible, and it could certainly be used and worked into a dish. It's really strong. But here's broccoli leaf. Since 2/3 of cauliflower broccoli plants are not typically harvested, can we do something with them? And yeah, we can make a salad mix in some other things. But this is really creative. Now, on the one hand, depending on where this occurs, there could be a negative consequence. Remember, it's kind of good, I think, in that if we're only harvesting 1/3 of a plant, where we leave another 2/3 of the plant in the field, returning the nutrients for the next crop. So this one, certainly depending on where the leaf, but typically this would be field. So I don't think this is the best solution. Nose to tail, you all got through meat. For a beef animal, maybe half the animal by weight is lost. Here's a startup, crowdsourcing, Crowd Cow. They won't harvest the animal until somebody's ordered every bit of it. Now, you still have a 40% loss in terms of, not all the entrails, obviously, some of the offals used, but the blood, the viscera, and things like that. So kind of cool. Just a managed little by little. Scraps, this one, the startup solution for scraps, Baldor, who's our main supplier here at the school, started this. And they take their processed waste and they turn it into fruit juices. There's a couple companies doing this. One of the great challenges is, and you would know this as a chef, because you're working with waste, it's really hard to standardize a recipe. So your juices are not real uniform. They have some variability. The way they're trying to fix that is they buy real non-waste and use it like for 80% of the product. Kind of defeats the purpose, but at least we're using some waste. So anyway, there's lots of different things here. These are interesting, didn't know if anybody popped into them. Here's a outfit that's making clothes out of food waste. Some of those are pretty spectacular. Bags from the pineapple skins, pineapple leather, and shoes. And again, as a business person, go to Dole and it's there for the asking. They just give it away. So there's no significant costs in terms of raw materials. Orange silk. There's a team in Europe making silk from dairy. Maybe it's this one here. So making clothing out of leftover dairy or spoiled dairy. So there's lots of examples. Any thoughts or any great ideas on how to reuse things? Anybody have a idea or have a recommendation here at the school? Please.
A little while back in the class, you mentioned that one of the professors, or one of the chefs or professors used to take the lamb fat that he would eat and throw it away anyways, and she'd process it into hand lotion. And I thought that'd be really cool to do if I had more time, but with my current class, but I can't.
Yeah, actually, you've all heard the term lanolin.
Yeah, it's really rich in that. It's really good.
Yeah, lanolin basically is the undercoating when they wash the wool. It's the natural oils in the wool, so it's similar to the fat, and it really is good. So I mean, there's a great example. I mean, you can make candles. You know, the early population in this country, they made when they harvested a steer or a beaver, they would make their tallow candles from the fat that they rendered from the carcass. So I mean, there's lots of uses. If there's no other comments, questions, I've got a pretty good video. If you're really interested in waste, by the way, there's a really kind of a funny video, but the facts are just really have real integrity. It's with Jamie Oliver. Some of you probably know who he is. He's a late night guy, and he's foul-mouthed, right? You've seen him before. But he basically did
You mean John Oliver?
John Oliver, not the chef. Yeah, John Oliver. He did an expose on food waste, and he got the best people in the world interviewed in it. So it's really technical, but of course so I won't show that to offend any of you. But this one's pretty straightforward. We can watch this, and I think we have just enough time. I can find it. Yeah.
It's right there. Click the bottom one down.
Thank you.
There's a problem with America's food system. It's not how much food we make, it's how much we end up throwing away. Pound for pound, more food goes into landfills across the country than any other single source of waste. The more food we throw away, the bigger the problem becomes.
You put food in a landfill, it creates methane gas, which is massively more potent than carbon dioxide in terms of climate change and greenhouse gases.
But more people are realizing all that food waste could be a valuable resource.
I mean, every farmer I work with is just so generous, and they would rather have their food feed people than even feed the chickens or compost it.
If we can just pull that stuff from our industrial sites and our grocery stores and also our school cafeterias, then we can pull that out of the landfill.
They're writing a recipe for change, so the food that's being thrown out doesn't all go to waste.
People are getting on board. People are wanting to know where their food comes from. And at the same point, they're saying, okay, where does it go?
There's more food available in the U.S. than ever before, but we're also throwing more food away. The amount of food Americans waste has been rising for decades. That has serious environmental and economic consequences. We begin our food waste story at the end of the line, the landfill. You put it on the curb, it goes away, never to be seen again. Of course, it all goes somewhere. The good thing, it's taken away and you don't have to think about it or smell it again. The bad thing, if you don't have to think about it, you probably don't. But once you start digging into it, you find out what you throw away and where it goes does make a difference. There are those who do have your garbage on their minds. Jack Chappelle is one of them. He sorts garbage. States and cities hire Chappelle's consulting company to look through their trash and tell them what it's made of.
You want to know how long the landfill can last, what materials you can get out of it, what materials you can take out of the waste stream to make the landfill last even longer.
Chappelle finds that a lot of what we throw away doesn't have to be. It could be recycled. Nationwide, more than 8 million tons of glass goes in the landfill, 24 million tons of cardboard and paper.
Still find an awful lot of bank statements and checks that people tear up in cans.
Then there's food.
In the country, you get more peelings, you get more vegetables. When you're in the city, you got a lot more fast food containers with half-eaten food in them, a lot more pizza boxes.
The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that nationally, about 20% of what goes into the landfill each year is food. Add all the food together from LA to New York, and America throws away nearly 35 million tons each year. 35 million tons. That's almost 100 Empire State Buildings made of food. Enough food goes uneaten in the United States in one day to feed the Denver metro area for 10 weeks. More than 2 million people could eat from New Year's to St. Patrick's Day.
We just have so much abundance of food that we don't realize the value of it.
Dan Mickey from the Iowa Waste Reduction Center works with businesses to cut back on what they throw away, including food. Mickey says waste happens at every level of the food chain.
You have food that is in warehouses that expires and they throw it away. Maybe they made a mistake and it doesn't have quite the flavoring they want. They don't want to sell it, so they throw it away. I think it's part of the culture today that compared to when our parents grew up, that, you know, now we don't look at food necessarily as a resource. We just look at a given.
From farmers to consumers, fruits and vegetables make up a third of the food loss in the U.S. Dairy products cover another 20% of what goes uneaten. When you look at the amount of food going unused, the costs add up environmentally and financially. First, let's look at the money.
40% of all the food in this country never makes it to the table, at a cost of $165 billion.
And that's just in the U.S. Globally, food losses add up to $750 billion. Behind those dollar signs is a significant environmental threat when food is buried in the landfill.
You're going to have generation of methane gas. Methane gas is a greenhouse gas, which is a contributor to global warming.
As a greenhouse gas, methane is 20 to 25 times stronger than just carbon dioxide. One thing landfills are able to do is capture the methane before it escapes into the atmosphere. It's happening at hundreds of landfills across the country. The landfill in Lincoln, Nebraska started collecting methane gas in 2013 and sending it here to a generating station where the gas is now burned to make energy.
That pipe comes from the landfill. The landfill is located about 1.5 miles west of us. So after the gas gets processed and cleaned, then we compress it, we send it through the pipeline underground into the building and then into the engine. The average Nebraska home uses 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. And so in an hour, we can supply enough energy to run 3,200 typical Nebraska homes.
3,200 homes powered by gas from food and other organic waste. For Dan Mickey, that kind of system may be a good backup for food that's already underground, but it's not the solution to the problem, because food is still taking up valuable landfill space. And he says there are better things to do with the food we don't eat.
We need to stop thinking of it as a waste, okay? Even though it's maybe not used for its intended purpose, it's still not a waste because it still has value. It's only a waste if you put it in the landfill.
And that's the last place he says it should go. Why does so much food go to waste? One reason might be that it's so affordable, it's considered disposable. Americans spend about 10% of their disposable income on food, a small percentage compared to other countries. But it's not that way for everyone. 49 million Americans sometimes have trouble putting food on the table. Much of what's currently being wasted could be used to feed families. Randy Mason introduces us to some people hungry to help make that happen.
You can just spread it out all the way to the end, and people can, have their own little patch.
On a mild Saturday morning in June, a team of volunteers arrives at this small farm in Kansas City, Kansas, ready to glean. That is, gather the unharvested lettuce and other crops that might otherwise never be picked and waste away in the fields.
And if you fill your bags to the top, but you can tie it shut, that'll be 3 pounds. So this is like 3 pounds right here.
Another day, it could be a cornfield near Baldwin City.
Gleaning is biblical, thousands of years old, so we're getting back to some of the basics. Wow. Well, yeah.
Or maybe a patch of beets and greens in Platte City, Missouri.
When we're gleaning, they'll say, okay, you can have this row here, and we take everything. And it's after they're done selling that crop. So it could be the mustard is close to bolting, or it has bolted. I mean, every farmer I work with is just so generous, and they would rather have their food feed people than even feed the chickens or compost it.
We started with a nonprofit called Society of St. Andrews. I actually opened that office in 2008, and over the next 6 years, we salvaged more than 15 million pounds of food to feed people. 15 million pounds.
Though Owsley might on occasion secure a donation of potatoes or some other crop by the semi-load, the bulk of what they collect still comes the old-fashioned way, one fruit or vegetable at a time. Food that's been left behind, largely because of aesthetics.
We've been to farms where they have squash, and they're this big, but that's too big to go on the grocery store shelf. So you go and pick everything that's ugly or blemished, still great edible food.
I don't care what it is, whether it's a strawberry or a beet or a piece of mustard, right out of the ground. It's so good.
And nutritionally good for the most food insecure portion of our population as well.
When people do food drives, they're getting cans and boxes and not fresh produce. And, everybody loves fresh produce. And to me, that just completes the whole fun cycle of this.
Even crops that make it out of the field don't all make it to consumers. Farmers markets like this one on the square in Fayetteville, Arkansas, showcase lots of great locally grown produce. But by Saturday night, much of what hasn't been sold may well be tossed out. A troubling thought when you consider 1 in 6 Americans may be underfed. Don Bennett's Tricycle Farms is one of several grassroots groups in Fayetteville determined to take an active role in dumpster diversion.
We do our part in our neighborhood, and it distributes close to about 300 to 400 pounds of food each Sunday.
And at the University of Arkansas, another aspect of food waste is being addressed. Leftovers from restaurants and cafeterias. It is, in a sense, another kind of gleaning program. 5 days a week, a student group called Razorback Recovery is saving salads, sandwiches, and baked goods from dining halls, retail sites, and events on campus, and taking them to Fayetteville food pantries.
The food's already there. It's already, made to the right standards and kept at the appropriate temperature. So instead of it being pitched into the dumpster, they just put it in our fridge, and we take it out to the agencies who need it.
The school's food service provider has some serious concerns about liability. What if their leftovers were mishandled and someone became ill? Nicole Savita, a faculty member at the university's food law program, said that is a common concern, but one that was largely laid to rest by a federal law passed in 1996.
The Bill Emerson Act does a very good job of balancing food safety interests and food recovery interests.
In a nutshell, the Emerson Act exempts those who donate apparently wholesome food in good faith from being sued as long as the food goes to a qualified nonprofit that feeds the hungry. Years after the law was passed, many are still unaware it exists. That led Savita to create a food recovery guide.
As soon as we published it, my phone started ringing on a regular basis with inquiries from people all over the country who wanted to promote food recovery, and we're glad to have a tool that they could use to go to a business and say, I know you're afraid of this, I know you think you're going to get sued, but here's how we do it in a way that protects you.
which leads to the kind of place where most of us get most of our food. The kind of place where 40% of what starts out fresh ends up getting thrown out, though much of it is still edible. Grocery chains across the country are looking at ways to knock that number down. A pilot program at this Harp store in Fayetteville began setting aside and sharing food that can no longer be sold, but can still be eaten.
Takes just as much time as it would to actually put it in there and go dump it as it would go through the table, same amount of time. One's actually helping somebody, one's not.
Our goal is to be proactive and see if we can shrink that 40%, one store at a time, and then once we get our systems together, be able to scale it up in a way that truly makes an impact. We want everybody who's involved in this program to be like, why wouldn't we do this?
By recovering the food that's not sold and gleaning the food that's not harvested, food gets a second chance to do what it does best, feed people.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
If food can't reach people, it doesn't have to be destined for the landfill. Even though composting leaves and grass clippings is commonplace, composting food isn't. Only 5% of food waste headed for the landfill is diverted for composting.
A lot of communities now have bins where you can throw your leaves and sticks in, right? What's happening to that stuff? Composting. Why can't we throw our food waste in those same bins? Another solution for the homeowner instead of throwing it in the trash.
Just a handful of communities collect food scraps, but Ryan Robertson found those scraps can be a valuable resource, and there are people out there finding ways to put food waste to work.
Food waste is more than just the leftovers people toss out. There's waste in the creation of food as well. Some companies have found ways to reuse and recycle that waste. Take Prairieland Dairy. There's a lot of manure coming from their 1,400 cows, but that manure, combined with waste from another Nebraska food manufacturer, makes good compost. Prairieland diverts about 2,000 tons of food waste from the county landfill every year for composting. A substantial amount for an operation of this size, but not much compared to the 35 million tons of food waste that goes to landfills nationally. But diverting that food fits with their motto: don't waste anything.
And the cow gives us our 3 M's, milk, meat, and manure, so we take advantage of all 3 of them.
That third M, manure, is why Prairieland started its composting program. It's the byproduct of dairy production, another kind of food waste. Composting speeds up the natural process of the breakdown and decay of organic materials. With time and a little maintenance, a nutrient-rich material is made, perfect for yards and gardens. But it takes more than manure to make good compost, which is why Prairieland adds yard and food waste to the mix.
We found out that about 85% of the stuff that goes to the landfill is compostable. So if we can just pull that stuff from our industrial sites and our grocery stores and also our school cafeterias, then we can pull that out of the landfill and reduce the landfill fill up by 85%.
To divert food from the landfill, Prairieland is partnering with one of the nation's largest food manufacturers, ConAgra Foods, based in Omaha. At ConAgra's Crush and Munch popcorn facility in Lincoln, the kernels that don't pop up quite right, the old maize, are separated out and sent to the dairy's compost piles.
In a manufacturing environment, there are always going to be a certain level of losses, yield losses, or incidents of failure that are going to generate waste.
Gail Tavel is the Vice President of Sustainability at ConAgra. Her job includes finding where the company is wasteful and trimming the fat.
When we set our goal, it was to divert at least 75% of materials from landfill. Today, we're over 90 across the board, and we have a handful of facilities that actually don't fill landfill anything.
We segregate those out, put a for donation only label on them.
Tavel says ConAgra has partnerships with organizations all over the country to recycle food waste, or what she now refers to as byproducts. In a ConAgra tomato processing plant in California, seeds and skins are being turned into highly nutritious feed for animals. Even the water in the tomato, which makes up about 80% of the fruit, It is also extracted and used for irrigation in nearby fields.
It just makes sense to, recirculate that water versus having it go out of the stack in terms of steam. So it just makes sense to capture water, especially in a state that is prone to drought.
But every operation produces some waste. After all, some things just can't be eaten. Research engineer Ivan Cornejo at the Colorado School of Mines is finding different ways to utilize food waste.
The process starts by collecting food waste from different sources. And then what we do with this, we process to extract the minerals.
Cornejo has a big idea to reduce food down to its building blocks, but he's not making compost.
I started working in the ceramic group, and then I started working more on the trash to glass concept.
You heard that right. Cornejo and his colleagues are turning trash into glass. Cornejo led the team that created Gorilla Glass, the material used to make the screen on your smartphone. And now, from his lab in Colorado, Cornejo is looking to organic waste as the mining operation of the future.
You find significant amount of silica or silicon sources from things like wheat, rice husk.
Once the food waste is reduced to minerals, Cornejo mixes the ingredients for glass and superheats them in a ceramic crucible. The process isn't ready for industrial scale, but in the lab, Cornejo can make glass with more clarity and purity than most sold on the market today. It may seem far-fetched, but Cornejo says it could be that kind of innovation that inspires the next generation.
We went to Colorado School of Mines to visit a professor named Dr. Cornejo, and he takes these food wastes and turns them into glass. And so we were helping him out by collecting these for him.
The new generation has a much better philosophy on sustainability that we have. When I was a kid, sustainability was not an issue. They find this like a very weird thing, but yet they find it very easy to understand. I think this could be the spark that is needed to revitalize the glass science and the ceramic science in this country.
Whether it's composting or mining for minerals, Cornejo says he's looking forward to the day when repurposing food waste is second nature.
Cutting back on food waste means changing people's habits. That's one thing they've learned at the University of Iowa hospitals, where they serve an average of 10,000 meals per day. Food scraps and compostable packages are separated and sent to the city compost pile. Leftovers are shared with a local food bank. It's working, but it takes extra time and effort.
It's like, say you want to eat healthy. It takes extra work, it takes some thought, it takes some planning. Same thing with reducing food waste, not choosing more than what you can eat, bringing your products back down to compost them. It's just a daily habit. I think people want to do it, most people do it, the other people are working on it.
If a hospital can change the way it thinks about food, maybe it's possible to make changes closer to home. One family is taking a new look at what they eat and what they throw away.
Now, you want to jump in the
The Urkel family does a lot of cooking at home. They try to be careful about what they eat, but they also watch what they don't eat.
My name is Sherry Urkel, my husband Kyle, and our daughter Asa. She's 5.5, so she'll be starting kindergarten. We live with Kyle's parents, Pat and Joyce Urkel.
The Urkels are food waste guinea pigs. They're one of around 50 families recruited to measure food waste. It's part of a study being done by Iowa City's recycling department with the Environmental Protection Agency. Recently, each of the families added a new gadget in the kitchen to track how much food they throw away. Sherry Urkel has a special name for it.
Oh, yeah, you told me I'll make more.
Green Bucket of Judgment.
Every single thing that is anything that had to do with food, or could be food, so even like bones, everything, because you're putting non-edible and edible, and you throw it in the bucket. And so at the end of the week, you have to weigh it, and so we have a Quaker scale.
Estimates vary, but the average American family tosses out anywhere from 15 to 25% of the food they buy. That adds up to around $1,500 to $2,500 per year, based on what the average family of 4 spends on food.
And so that's just like food on our plate that we didn't eat. So we've thrown away 4 pounds of food in 2 days. So, judgment.
They're seeing it pile up, they're seeing it collect, and at the end of the week, they're seeing how much they actually produced.
Jane Wilch is leading the study in Iowa City. She says it's eye-opening for families to actually see what they've thrown away.
So I think that's a really good mechanism to bring about that consciousness about food waste, because they're seeing themselves produce it, which I don't think that existed prior to this.
At the end of the study, families will turn in data showing how much food went unused. In the meantime, they're looking for ways to cut back on what goes in the bucket. A few basic tips can help anyone reduce food waste. Plan out what you're going to eat. Make a shopping list and stick to it. Use the food you bring home, and eat your oldest food first. The Urgels now plan every meal in advance. It's on a calendar for everyone to see. To stay on schedule, they prepare food ahead of time and use the freezer to store meals for the week.
Kyle grilled a bunch of meat on Sunday for the week, so we put it in the freezer and we just pulled it out today, and so now we're going to make fajitas tonight. Peppers we freeze too, because otherwise we forget about them. They get rotten in the middle. So we just chop up a bunch at once and then use them for everything.
There's also a special spot in the fridge for food that's about to go bad and needs to be eaten.
I boiled some eggs to eat because those are quick protein for like on your way to work. And then last night we didn't eat all of our broccoli, so like Ace didn't eat all of our broccoli. And so we put it here, but instead of like in a container where I can't see it, where it'll get shoved to the back, I put it in open, and so it's down there so I know, like, okay, I'm going to put that in my lunch tomorrow because I don't want it to go to waste.
For food to last as long as possible in the refrigerator, learn about the labels you see at the grocery store. Confusion about labels is one reason food ends up in the garbage. When you see a date on a food container, you might think of it as a deadline. But food scientist Harshavardhan Tippereddy says best by, use by, and sell by dates are added voluntarily by food processors. They estimate a food's shelf life, that is, how long the lettuce will be crisp, or how long before the milk begins to sour.
The producers put that label on there to provide the best eating experience for that product, not because of safety issues beyond that time period.
Many people think the dates show how long the food is safe to eat and throw out good food just to be on the safe side. But Tippereddy says only one food is required by law to carry a date for safety: baby formula. Otherwise, if you're happy with how food tastes, Tippereddy says you shouldn't throw it out just because of the date on the package. The old saying, when in doubt, throw it out, can be wasteful advice.
If you know how you refrigerated the product or kept the product, you can use it for until that time period or maybe beyond that time period, because all those use by, sell by dates are for shelf life, not for safety.
What it all boils down to is buying what you need and eating what you buy. It may be new advice for recent generations, but it used to be part of the culture, even part of the war effort during both world wars. Joyce Circle was born during the Great Depression. She says saving food was part of growing up.
Well, when I was a kid, you recycled. You know, your parents didn't throw away anything. Your coffee grounds went in the yard to help with worms, you know, if you want to go fishing.
We really learned a lot from his parents, and another thing they do, like Joyce always eats with a smaller plate. So you're going to fill whatever plate you have, so using a smaller plate, then you're less likely to waste.
I never throw away food, never. If I have corn or green beans or peas, or I keep it and use it in a soup. It's just a habit, you know, and it's a good habit.
And when it comes to food, it pays to have good habits, because wasted food is really wasted money. Food waste is piling up. Millions of tons go into our landfills and put off harmful greenhouse gases. So more people are looking for ways to take a bite out of the problem.
It's not a waste if we find a responsible alternative method for its use.
And if it's being diverted to animal feed or composting or some other higher value than landfill, it's really not being wasted anymore.
Rather than go to waste, food could become a kind of natural resource. Leftover food could be mined for minerals or added back to the soil it came from.
the greener idea is coming around. So we believe that we're going to get a lot more companies that are wanting to send their stuff to the compost site rather than to the landfill.
Even though farmers are growing more food, we're also throwing more away, while millions in the United States go hungry.
Waste is recognized in the produce industry as just a part of the business. And while there is going to be some waste, we can help prevent a lot of that waste. Why waste perfectly good food just because no one wants to bend over and pick it up?
Too much food that families buy ends up in the garbage. Making the most of food at home cuts back on waste and perhaps even grocery bills.
Planning your menus, prepping more food at home ahead of time. Like, the more you take care of your food on the front end, the less likely you'll be to waste it.
It's in part getting people to find the love for the leftovers, and that there's a difference between food that maybe looks a little shabby and food that is unsafe.
In the end, food is worth too much just to toss it out. And the more people realize that, the less it will go to waste.
Are there any comments from the video?
It's pretty straightforward. It's almost what we should do to help save this planet.
It is straightforward. I mean, this isn't rocket science. And
They're basically telling you what's
Yeah.
going to happen later on down the road if we don't take a hold of this.
great. And as individuals, you can make a huge difference, especially in the food service industry. One of the things to remember that I want to make sure came across is we've spent this class, we've looked at a number of natural resources and the impacts of depleting those resources to our food system. When we create waste at the very final stage of the supply chain, the consumption, we have accrued all those resources through the various stages. It is extremely wasteful. So you aren't just saving food, you're saving energy, you're saving water, you're saving soil. So it's really important. This is one area that if we could cut this just in half, we could make some huge differences here in the world, I think. So I challenge you to think about it. And the other thing, keep in the back of your mind, I think it is an opportunity. Not just maybe give yourself a name in a community as a chef who's really proactive in this area, but it actually could be an economic opportunity. I think that idea of co-product, finding utility for waste, is really creative and could be a business. And there's grants at community levels because you're doing something that has public value. So it really is an opportunity for you. All right. Well, then just a reminder, so next class we get together, we will have a final exam. And that's that. Go ahead, please.
Are we writing our paper in class?
Oh, thank you. We're not writing a paper in class. I've got to open that up. Let me show you how that works. Yeah, I didn't realize it was an 11-day class.
Huh?
Let me see. I think I have the question already for you.
Yeah.
What does it do? Thursday, I guess.
If it'll help, I'll give you till, Friday or Saturday to do it? Cool. I'll give you till Saturday evening at, let's say, 11 o'clock.
All right.
So here's your assignment, writing assignment. Really straightforward. Again, if you want to know how I grade, there's kind of a rubric here, but what I'm really looking for is content. I want to know that you have learned something, you know what you're talking about. So that's the majority of it. The question is, select a natural resource, one from the topics of the course, and discuss the role this resource plays within our food system. Identify areas of concern, and suggest a strategy for lessening the impact. Pretty easy.
For the final, to prepare for the final, I saw that you had a link for a study question.
Yeah.
Can you suggest that we go through that on the PowerPoint, which should be good to go?
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, this class did pretty well on the previous two tests. It's just like it.
Okay.
So, okay, so I'll set this up. I'll open this tomorrow, and it will be open to 11 p.m. Saturday, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Very good. See everybody on Thursday.
And